This video is brought to you by Squarespace, an all-in-one platform for building your brand and growing your business online. Okay, I watched The Idea of You last night, and very quickly, have any of you watched this movie? It's relatively new. Anne Hathaway x Nicholas Galitzine, a rom-com based on a book where the main character is inspired by Harry Styles. And I'm not sure what Harry Styles has done cosmically to deserve this, but he's been the inspiration for 2 different book-to-movie characters now, and it's just so bizarre. I wonder if he's watched any of this stuff.
You know, my favorite thing about the movie is it feels like a movie. It feels like a real film movie.
The movie is about a 40-year-old mother and a 24-year-old boy band pop star falling in love.
I met someone tonight.
And look, I think Miss Annie Hathaway is a phenomenal actress, and I cried watching this movie multiple times. I'm not afraid to admit it. She just plays a sad girl really well. And I appreciate it. I eat it up. I remember in my acting classes when we had to emotionally prepare for sadness, which is to basically get ourselves in a sad state before entering a scene, I would be backstage playing her I Dreamed a Dream and just instant tears. I think the acting made the movie more watchable, but something was off the whole time for me. I just couldn't really buy the characterizations of the main couple. So Anne Hathaway's character is supposed to be this middle-aged divorcee, mother of a high school junior who owns a successful art gallery, but she's really naive, childish, and outwardly unconfident. Nicholas's character is very emotionally mature and grounded in the real world, despite having been a world-famous pop star since he was 14 years old. I think it's the writer's way of leveling the playing field because the whole point of the movie is that they're in this 15-year age gap relationship, and in order for it to not seem predatory to us as an audience, Nicholas's character, the younger one, has to have some kind of leg up on Anne's character to, sort of offset the power differential. But it just doesn't really make a lot of sense given their backstories. I still had fun watching it though, even though, I was thinking about it and I haven't gravitated to a rom-com in a long time because most of the ones that have been made in the past 10 years have been unwatchably bad. But ever since Anyone But You, news outlets have been whispering the idea of a rom-com renaissance in the works. And it seems like they're onto something because I just checked and The Idea of You has over 80% on Rotten Tomatoes. So, for this video, I want to explore the history of romantic comedy movies, the golden age of the 90s and 2000s, and whether or not those movies were even that good, what's happened since, and how it all relates to our own views on love and relationships. Let's get started.
Love is patient, love is kind. Love means slowly losing your mind.
I'm also just a girl standing in front of a boy asking him to love her.
Oh, we're in luck, a rom-com marathon.
Squarespace offers the best tools for easy website design. Their website design system called Fluid Engine lets you customize every design detail with this unique drag and drop technology. And you can, of course, use it to design both your website's desktop and mobile layouts. Not only can you design a bangin' website, Squarespace has built-in analytics so that you can also track who's coming across your beautiful new page. Check out page views, traffic sources, time on site, most read content, audience geography, and more. You can also use Squarespace to set up a store. There are options to list anything from physical products to digital downloads to subscriptions and memberships. Check out squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Mina to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
Now I'm going to duck out and get some breakfast.
Well, I thought the plan was to stay here and look married.
I want to start in the 1930s because the 1930s is when we got the talkies, or movies with sound dialogue. Technically, the first talkie was the jazz singer in 1927, but we're rounding to the closest decade, okay? Important to note that in the early 20s, societal views towards sex were changing. Premarital sex was still kind of hush-hush, but people started to view sex as a pleasurable act between husband and wife, and not just an act for procreation. And related, the idea of a companionate marriage was starting to take hold in the late 1920s over the patriarchal model that ruled the Victorian era. Obviously, families were still pretty patriarchal. Men usually were the breadwinners, and domestic abuse was still a problem. Is still a problem today, but the general idea was that young people wanted to actually be friends and lovers with their spouses. By the way, that's not to say that people didn't have fun in their marriages before the 1920s. Dr. Clelia Mosher conducted a survey between 1892 and 1920 and found that a surprising number of wives actually had healthy sexual relations with their husbands. But the publicized idea at the time was that procreation was the utmost importance. Young men and women of the 1920s, though, took it a step further in radicalizing against mainstream Protestant ideals. There's a great magazine called Flapper Magazine. There's so many good examples of like the kind of ideology that young people had at the time. There's this one November 1922 issue where a contributor wrote, "Why in the name of common sense do the manufacturers of ladies' clothing insist upon girls wearing long skirts when we simply don't want them? What do they think we are, a bunch of jellyfish with no minds of our own?" Hear, hear. Heather Glimmer wrote about how romantic comedies of the early 20th century reflected this new ideology. So, romantic comedies of the 1930s are usually referred to as screwball comedies today. The screwball comedy is a subgenre of romantic comedy film characterized by physical comedy, verbal banter, and an eccentric leading couple. While screwball is kind of used loosely now, historical trade and popular press actually only use the term to refer to a limited number of comedies released between 1936 and 1938. The earliest usage of the term screwball actually comes from a 1936 Variety review of My Man Godfrey, which states, "Miss Lombard has played screwball dames before, but none so screwy as this one." Gilmore notes the more progressive aspects of the screwball comedy, namely the fact that the female characters tended to control the narrative flow. Female characters were usually just as or more economically empowered than the male characters, and children are rarely part of the story, making it possible to focus fully on the couple's relationship as equal individuals, and less as a dynamic between mother and father, which was, especially in the 1930s, steeped in inequality. Gilmore writes, "The couple's childlessness also reflects a historical moment when sex for its own sake, and not necessarily for procreation, was acceptable. Contraception was becoming ever more popular, and the rate of childbirth was falling." What I found really interesting when researching screwball comedies is that, in general, the public actually gave many of these films lukewarm receptions, even bringing up Baby, which is widely considered a timeless classic today. The main criticism for the early screwballs was that they were too nonsensical and bizarre. It's a fair assessment. But everything changed with The Awful Truth in 1937. Following the success of this movie, screwball comedy writers pivoted their strategy, trading out slapstick humor for suggestive ambiguity in their comedy repertoire. Even though The Awful Truth does have its slapstick moments still, the dialogue in the movie was filled with all these very fun double entendres.
"I am a great teacher, not a great lover."
That's right, Omar. No one could ever accuse you of being a great lover.
Huh?
So in this scene, Lucy's line could be interpreted as innocent, hinting to the audience that Armand is a virgin. However, there's the alternative, more fun read, that she has already slept with him premaritally and thinks he's just bad in bed. This became a model for following screwballs. Also, if you think about it, this is a model for old children's TV shows as well. There are just so many jokes from shows that I grew up with, like in SpongeBob SquarePants.
"Edric, your genius is showing."
Where?
That had double entendre meanings, which makes them still fun to revisit as an adult. Like, I really appreciate the commitment to making shows that can be enjoyed by adults supervising their children too. I don't watch kids shows anymore, but the general consensus I've heard is that the shows that they're making nowadays are just really not watchable once you're over the age of like 8, which is a shame. TV is a family affair.
But you don't look so hot yourself.
I should add that the reason why screwball comedies were so dialogue heavy and physical comedy laden is because of the Hollywood production code, known as the Hays Code, which censored just about everything. Couples were not even allowed to kiss lying down in movies because it implied they were getting nasty or about to. Film critic Andrew Sarris, channeling a screenwriter from the 1930s, writes, "Here we have all these beautiful people with nothing to do. Let us invent some substitutes for sex. The wisecracks multiply beyond measure, and when audiences tire of verbal sublimation, the performers do cartwheels and pratfalls and make funny expressions." Another popular trope in the screwball comedy was the remarriage trope, and this also reflected real-life increasing divorce rates. According to historian Elaine Tyler May's research, by the end of the 1920s, more than 1 in 6 marriages terminated in court. Between 1910 and 1940, the divorce rate nearly doubled, in spite of a slight decline in the early 1930s. As David Shumway theorizes in his book Modern Love, remarriage became the leading plot of screwball comedy because divorce had become a common, but still threatening, feature of American life. Screwball comedies respond not so much to the fears of social collapse articulated by moralists as to the fears of individuals about the fate of their own current or future marriages. The project of the comedies of remarriage is to reaffirm the romantic view of marriage in the face of its failure. There's many theories as to why divorce was becoming so popular. Some people blame, liberal divorce laws. Some people blame the general conditions of urban life. And some people claim that rising expectations of personal happiness put an increased burden on marriage. The expectation, once again, of a happy companionate marriage that was at least in part encouraged by Hollywood. As Shumway writes, the specific illusion that the screwball comedy constructs is that one can have both complete desire and complete satisfaction, and that the name for the state of affairs is marriage. He also notes the patriarchal undertone of these movies, namely the fact that the usual dynamic is that of a spunky woman and a rational man who tries to tame her.
Hold on there, Susan! Susan! Can you hear me? I'll be there, Susan!
Basically, taming of the shrew. Shumway also writes, there remains an element of dyadic narrative in many screwball comedies expressed in the frequent importance of the bride's father, in spite of his extraneousness to the basic narrative structure. As an example, at the beginning of the movie It Happened One Night, Ellen runs away from her father because he disapproves of the man she eloped with, setting motion to these course of events where she meets and eventually develops a romance with journalist Peter. And spoiler alert, but you've had 100 years to see this movie. All is well in the end because Ellen's father approves of Peter and they can carry on with their union.
Want to spend the night in a motel? See what I did? I didn't let it lie.
Harry.
I said I would and then I didn't.
Harry.
The reason why Hollywood stopped making screwballs can be attributed to a number of factors. One of the big ones that Kelsey Matson points out in her Collider article was World War II. She writes, after the US entered World War II, Hollywood's attention shifted to raising funds for the war effort and embodied serious themes of patriotism and selflessness instead of rambunctious shenanigans. And once the war ended, Americans returning to their shattered image of suburbia peace found comfort in Technicolor melodramas and movie musicals. It's not a huge leap to assume that people wanted more grounded escapism that reflected their changing world. Or at least dramas where the intensely high stakes were serious but fake. I would also say that the screwball comedy was very prescriptive. There was a formula audiences expected to see every time they went to these movies. As I said, there were lots of somersaulting and dramatic zingy quips and one-liners, but these theatrical comedic techniques have all kind of fallen out of favor with the rise of Stanislavski acting techniques in the 1950s, such as the method, which strive for realism. So the fervor for a movie that combined romance and comedy didn't peter out, they just transformed to better reflect people's changing tastes. Over the second half of the 20th century, we started to see the rise of movies that were literally called romantic comedies or romcoms. And the major difference, according to film professor Westy Gehring in his book Romantic versus Screwball Comedy, is that while still funny, a romcom is dead serious about the importance of love. As an example of this earnestness, I'll play one of my favorite lines from my favorite romantic comedy, When Harry Met Sally.
I came here tonight because when you realize you want to spend the rest of your life with somebody, you want the rest of your life to start as soon as possible.
We can compare this bit of dialogue to a line from What's Up, Doc, a 1972 movie, another fantastic movie, by the way, that pays tribute to the screwball comedy genre.
As the years go by, romance fades and something else takes its place. Do you know what that is?
Senility.
Also, fun fact that I learned when researching, the original draft of When Harry Met Sally actually has the couple, Harry and Sally, not end up together. And this is mostly because the screenwriter, Nora Ephron, had crafted the character of Harry after director Rob Reiner and the character of Sally after herself. Both of them were divorced, and Reiner in particular had written off all romantic prospects after having been single for a near decade.
because I've been married for 10 years, I'd been single for 10 years, and I couldn't figure out how I was ever going to be with anybody. And that gave birth to When Harry Met Sally.
But then Rainer changed the ending when he spontaneously found love during production. Yeah, Rainer met his second wife, Michelle Singer, while shooting a scene in the movie. She was visiting the set along with her friend, cinematographer Barry Sonnenfeld's wife, Susan Ringo, and Rainer was so smitten with her that he tagged along to their lunch date. Rainer and Singer ended up marrying before the movie even came out to theaters. So we can thank Michelle Singer for the best romantic comedy of the millennium. The other major factor that separates a romantic comedy from a screwball comedy is that there is usually some kind of serious and or melodramatic circumstance that love has to triumph over. For example, the movie Sleepless in Seattle opens with a funeral, and we find out that the male love interest, Sam, has just become a widowed father. Waring's other central components to a romantic comedy are the believability of its characters, an emphasis on a traditional dating ritual, and a propensity for slower story pacing, especially near the end of the film. A lot of people talk about romantic comedy as if it's a dead genre, which is, it's somewhat true. Objectively, there were just more romantic comedies produced in the 90s and early 2000s than there have been in the past 15 years. However, the genre is not completely dead. 2023 produced over 30 new romantic comedies. I just think the ones that exist somehow can't mirror the success of past ones. I mean, in 1990, Pretty Woman was in the top 4 highest grossing films of the year. But by 2016, not one romantic comedy made it to the top 50 highest grossing films in domestic box offices. I do think there's a bit of a nostalgic factor that plays into this because there were a handful of romantic comedies I didn't grow up with from the 90s that I later watched as an adult, and I do think they were not that good. Not to start fights with anyone, but Sleepless in Seattle and You've Got Mail were major disappointments for me. I thought the whole premise of Sleepless in Seattle was a bit stupid and made Meg Ryan's character look like a stalker. And then You've Got Mail was trying to make the audience ignore the fact that Tom Hanks' character drove Meg Ryan's business to the ground. They tried to get us to root for them as a couple afterwards. It was just so bizarre. I'm like, he literally killed her business. Why would I find that romantic? But it was cute. It's nostalgic and I love 90s style, so I'll still watch it, I guess. Also, because of how much content exists on streaming, it's easier for movies to get lost to the mix, and I'm sure there's actually some really great movies that will never get the same kind of classic status as these earlier rom-coms because no one's watched them. Like He's All That. Just kidding, in case you thought I was serious. As English professor Tommy Jenkins told Technician Online, this is a generalization, but the 90s were a last grasp for Hollywood before streaming came into play. Once streaming came into play, it's kind of hard to keep up with all of the content that's available to us now. In the 90s, it was still like, hey, look at this big romantic comedy. It's more difficult for movies to do that now, unless they really break through. Jenkins also says that today's modern technology removes the possibility of certain beloved tropes and also ruins some of the serendipitous magic present in older movies. He explains, to create these romantic entanglements in the 90s, you could do all kinds of things where people miscommunicate because everybody didn't have a cell phone. Now it's like we're texting each other, we're gonna know where everybody is and doing all the time. As Rhea Kanan sums up in her article for Technician Online, what we miss in the 90s rom-coms might not be just the stories themselves, but the preservation of what might seem to be a simpler society that, by design, allowed for more immersive and entertaining stories. Scott Meslow, who wrote the book From Hollywood with Love, says the decline of rom-com hits can also be explained by studios' disinvestment in mid-budget movies. The reason studios have shifted away from mid-budget cinema to costly, high-production Marvel-type movies is because of, surprise, money. There seems to be an attitude these days for studios to go big or go home. In 1990, the inflation-adjusted average production budget of the top 20 grossing films was $63 million. But in 2019, it ballooned to $141 million. The reason being that today's streaming services and social media platforms are competing with Hollywood, and so studios know that a film must have buzz to be able to bring people into theaters. This is also why they've been leading on IP material and the same 15 high-profile actors. While there are still non-action movies getting produced and winning awards for sure, they either fare with smaller budgets than in the past or they have to strike a deal with a streamer. For example, the Oscars 2022 Best Picture, Coda, cost $10 million and their 2021 winner, Nomadland, cost $5 million. Neil Iyer reported for Independent Magazine that Spike Lee's Da 5 Bloods cost $40 million, which categorizes it as a mid-budget feature. He hoped for an early 2022 theatrical release, but after struggling to secure a deal with a major studio, he had to partner with Netflix. If a celebrated director like Spike Lee can't find a non-streaming distribution deal, how will anyone make a studio-backed movie that doesn't feature Thanos or Green Lantern? If you notice, also, these movies that are greenlit with lower budgets are also like award season bait movies, dramas, and biopics. Romcoms are a historically overlooked category at the Oscars and subsequently get deprioritized. And consumers have also seemed to care less about mid-budget movies too, for whatever the reason. But I assume it's a mix of movie ticket prices being high, the fact that streamers tend to pick up movies within a month after they complete their theater runs, which makes people even less incentivized to go to the theater, or again, the fact that there's too many shows and movies available in general. And we all get decision fatigue. And by the time we decide, yeah, we'll watch that movie, it's already run its whole theater course. Either way, mid-budget movies aren't doing well for the most part. As another example, reporter Samuel Rosenthal looked at the movies The Holdovers, which released in 2023, and Dead Poets Society, which released in 1989. These movies are not just comparable in terms of subject matter, but also had about the same budget between production costs and distribution costs. Both were about $40 million when adjusted for inflation, and had similarly glowing reviews with multiple Oscar nominations. However, Dead Poets Society went on to earn over $500 million when adjusted for inflation, while The Holdovers only earned $43 million, not even enough to be profitable due to the 2.5 times rule. The 2.5 times rule is a typical rule for profitability in Hollywood, by the way. Basically, the movie needs to earn 2.5 times the budget to be considered profitable, because production budgets don't include marketing costs and theater revenue shares. There have been, of course, some mid-budget films that have done well, like Rian Johnson's Knives Out, which was produced on a $40 million budget and made $311 million, and Jordan Peele's Us, produced on a $20 million budget, making $255 million, but not enough of them to revive mid-budget cinema. For reference, from 1996 to 2001, 36% of films had budgets between $15 and $65 million. This number plummeted between 2016 to 2021 to only 5%. Matt Damon has talked at length about the disappearance of these films because they were the ones to initially jumpstart and sustain his career. In a New York Times feature, he said that his bread and butter were the movies made on a $20 to $70 million budget. Similarly, when I was reading up about these 90s rom-coms, while many of them ended up recycling the same actors, they also catapulted those actors into stardom to begin with.
I thought we were going to be friends forever. We're not?
No, we're not going to be friends anymore, Debbie.
Unlike 90s Hollywood stars who profited from the public's interest in mid-budget cinema and rom-coms today are no longer seen as star-making vehicles. Kyle Buchanan reported for Vulture in 2017, new recruits to the Lady A-list, like Margot Robbie, Brie Larson, and Shailene Woodley, have no romantic comedies on their docket. For years, this was a genre that would mint superstars, and now young women are content to bypass it entirely. Buchanan continues to point out that rather than churning out mainstream Hollywood movies for ages until finally getting picked up by big directors a la Sandra Bullock, young Hollywood actresses are instead focusing on getting cast in these serious, high-art movies as soon as possible in their careers. He notes Jennifer Lawrence's breakthrough role was the indie movie Winter's Bone, which landed her first Oscar nomination, and Margot Robbie's breakthrough role was a Martin Scorsese movie. More recently, I think Kaylee Spaney's breakthrough role was Sofia Coppola's Priscilla. Male actors have also been rom-com avoidant. Earlier this year, Kate Hudson went on The View to talk about how difficult it is to recruit big male actors into the genre because they would rather go down the lucrative action hero route. For example, Chris Evans and Mark Ruffalo, who both had a repertoire of rom-coms before their Marvel contracts and have not revisited the rom-com since. I don't necessarily blame any of these actors, by the way. I think almost anyone would prefer a high-paying movie role over a low-paying one. And if you do take a lower pay, you would hope the movie would be serious enough to at least get picked up by award season, which would make it worth it. It's just sort of like sad that rom-coms, which have once formed the backbone of entertainment since like Shakespeare's Globe, have become so unpopular and unprestigious over time. So, without any new A-listers interested in the genre, the mid-budget movie won't be able to justify a theatrical release, which is how we get movies like Marry Me, Ticket to Paradise, Shotgun Wedding, The Lost City, and Maybe I Do, which has leaned on casting previous generations rom-com movie stars to generate buzz. With the exception of The Lost City, these movies were more or less panned by critics, though. Kate Hudson mentioned that the main problem with modern rom-coms is the declining quality of its writing.
You should put some ice on your balls.
You should put some ice on my balls.
Okay.
That's not to say that the writing of the 90s and 2000s was perfect. A lot of the grievances with the genre people overlook because of nostalgia reasons.
It's turkey time.
Huh?
I actually remember there was a lot of anti-rom-com fervor in the early 2010s when online culture became obsessed with feminist media critique. So, for example, Lindy West published a really popular essay on Jezebel in 2013 titled, "I rewatched Love Actually and I'm here to ruin it for all of you." In it, she writes a takedown of virtually every storyline. Here's an example. So you know the scene when Andrew Lincoln is like holding up those cue cards, declaring his love for Keira Knightley? West writes about it. That best man guy shows up at Keira Knightley's house and spawns a decade of nice guy emotional manipulation reframed as romance. And Keira Knightley fucking kisses him for it. I mean, she's right. Journalist Chris Egerton wrote in a 2015 piece that counted down 11 offensive cliches in rom-coms. Mostly, I think we just got tired of living the baby boomer fantasy of ideal romantic love, propagated in large part by the society's unprogressive cultural expectations regarding gender roles. But by the late 2010s, most of the internet soured on these kinds of virtue signaling critiques, maybe in the face of like larger problems like COVID and Trump's presidency. But online discourse over media from 20 years ago started to feel pointless or nitpicky. What I've realized with my own viewing is that dating life has changed so much since the 90s. I mean, life has changed so much since the 90s. So watching these movies, for me, is like watching a period piece. We can appreciate them for their time period, the music, the costumes, and the silly dating conventions. Like, you can only enjoy them if you view them as like truly escapist media. And they're so escapist because the problems that they deal with, probably by virtue of the characters being white and upper middle class, are basically non-problems, and they don't remind us of the 2020s daily stresses like climate change and health insurance payments. This isn't to say these romantic comedies couldn't be realistic and still relevant. As Hania Angus writes for Dazed, When Harry Met Sally prides itself on examining love and the complexities of relationships, but it never attempts to belittle its viewers. In comparison, she criticizes Anyone But You for its cynical self-awareness of rom-com tropes that would be, quote, unbearable for even the most devoted fan. I actually disagree with this take on Anyone But You, which, by the way, ended up making a gross revenue of $100.2 million worldwide. I personally didn't love the movie, but every time I see a movie get received so well, I kind of go back and reevaluate it and try to understand why it did so well. And the thing is, I think that if you went into the movie with a genuine hope that this was going to be the greatest rom-com of all time, it'll flop. But if you go into the movie wanting to just have fun, then it can be a great time. For me, the tropes were put in there less to be cynical and more to be campy and purposely unserious, sort of similar to Mamma Mia. If Anyone But You came out at the same time as When Harry Met Sally, trust, I think it would have bombed at the box office. The writing was totally off and the approach to love didn't really feel genuine. But Anyone But You resonated because it was paying homage to previously great movies that we miss and don't have anymore. And in a similar vein, I don't even know if Nora Ephron movies would hit the same way today if they came out because of changing attitudes towards love and relationships. They would probably feel dated and people would be like, what is this? For a rom-com to really hit now, at least for me, it has to acknowledge that audiences are aware of the stereotypical cheesiness associated with the genre. And the writers have to either skew more into the rom-dramedy genre, so that's romance, drama, and comedy, with Silver Linings Playbook and The Big Sick, or go full throttle into the cheesy fun like with Mamma Mia. When researching, I read a lot of essays about how the rom-com genre can save itself by pivoting to more diverse couples, with Crazy Rich Asians being used as a prime example. This movie came out, I think, in like 2018, and it became the highest grossing rom-com in a very long time. And yes, while I think there's definitely an opening for more representation in the genre, I personally love to see it. I actually think what made Crazy Rich Asians especially memorable and well-liked is the fact that it was a rom-dramedy. It had similar comedic beats to a typical rom-com, but it was less naive in its depiction of relationships and arrived at its happily ever after conclusion in a more organic and realistic way. The idea view also leaned into rom-dramedy, with the second half of the movie tonally darker than the first half. Like, Miss Anne could not catch a break in the second half of that movie. And I don't want to spoil this one because it's relatively new. The ending, it does take a little suspension of disbelief, right? But I do think that for the most part, it was kind of portrayed as realistically as any kind of like meet cute age gap celebrity fan fiction could be. And I think that if they cast like worse actors, it would have just totally been like lost to the sands of time. So this quote by writer Toju also resonates with me deeply. The focus on making realistic rom-coms can kill the romance in a way, but that might just be a reflection of dating nowadays, which is inherently less earnest, less romantic, and less vulnerable. So a few years ago, researchers at SUNY Buffalo analyzed 188 romantic comedy scripts that were produced between 1980 and 2019 to see how the genre has changed over time and what it might say about Americans' views on love. One of the more interesting trends they found was that the relationship we see in the movie theater are increasingly grounded in conflict, mixed feelings, and uneasiness. I don't think less naive dating stories are bad. As I said, Crazy Rich Asians popped off. But I think making a rom-dramedy requires more thought and tonal balance, which is difficult to execute because if the ending skews too happy, it might feel forced and unnatural. But if it skews too cynical, then it becomes too depressing for viewers. And after all, as we said, most people watch rom-coms as an escape from the challenges of life, particularly dating life. We don't want to see anything that depressing if we're looking for an escape. Speaking of, it is no secret that there's a lot of dating pessimism these days with the lack of third spaces and the advent of app swiping hell. Users also regularly share their bad dating story times and post cringe Hinge profiles they come across on TikTok, which, while entertaining, doesn't help the general outlook on things. Asa Sorensen coined the term heteropessimism in 2019 to mean performative disaffiliations with heterosexuality, usually expressed in the form of regret, embarrassment, or hopelessness about straight experience. He explains how it thrives on social media in particular. Much of Gen Z may have learned norms about dating and sex from social media before actually participating. I think the result of that is not that you end up making all the right choices and not being disappointed. It's that you actually end up having this very heavily mediated experience of the world, where everything that you experience is kind of always being played back in this meta-narrative that you're getting from social media. I would argue that dating pessimism, while definitely big for straight people, has reached everyone at this point. But some hopefuls believe that these circumstances will, at the very least, revive the rom-com genre again. Like, everyone might be lonely and depressed, but at least we have better movies. Actress Malin Ackerman told Parade, I think people need a bit more lightheartedness. We need some escapism, joy, and love and romance. Human connection has been really lost for the past couple years in the pandemic. I can understand why studios are investing in that. I mean, last summer, the term Delulu went mainstream among online millennials and Zoomers as a rally for self-empowerment and believing the impossible. And also, going back to my joke, I don't mean to say that, like, the pursuit of rom-coms is kind of minor pursuit. I actually think that bringing joy is really important, especially in our time. Like, as I was like alluding to, when people watch all these really negative TikToks about dating, it kind of like infiltrates your brain space and it makes you more pessimistic. Whereas I think if people are exposed to like happier plot lines and, successful experiences, especially if they're more rooted in realism, which, is the trend that I see for rom-coms these days, I think that it can be very uplifting and inspiring and can only do good. Anyways, Also, like with fashion trends, movie trends have also been cyclical. The 1960s and 1980s were years of blockbuster boom and bust, while the 1970s and 1990s were years of director-driven indies. Steven Spielberg predicted the blockbuster cycle would end at some point and referenced his prophecy in a 2013 speech he gave at USC, in which he said, "There's eventually going to be an implosion or a big meltdown. There's going to be an implosion where 3 or 4 or maybe even a half dozen mega budget movies are going to go crashing into the ground, and that's going to change the paradigm." Spielberg couldn't predict how streaming, the pandemic, and writer and actor strikes would factor in, but it is interesting that the tide seems to be shifting. For example, Disney CEO Bob Iger has acknowledged some blockbuster stagnation, saying that Marvel will stick with releasing just 3 movies a year. And some of last year's mid-budget films like Civil War, Anyone But You, and Elvis turned into surprise box office hits. Austin Goslin reported for Polygon that at CinemaCon 2024, an annual trade show where industry leaders meet to discuss the state of moviegoing, that more than once, presenters from studios or theater owners mentioned the speech given at last year's Academy Awards by American fiction writer Cord Jefferson. Accepting the award, he said,
"Instead of making one $200 million movie, try making 20 $10 million movies. Or 50, right? 50 $4 million movies."
Here's how rom-coms can still win. My historical analysis is that movies tend to reflect audience attitudes. Similar to how screwball comedies were salvs during the Great Depression and among increasing divorce rates, I think everyone's appetite for an escapist rom-com is increasing, and Hollywood will have to start delivering. While Zoomers have the reputation for being the nihilistic generation, I don't actually believe nihilism is sustainable because it's exhausting. And what I predict is that we'll start to see more rational optimism take hold among younger people, aka this idea that like while things are bad, we've realized that being pessimistic actually burns us out more, and we'll shift to being optimistic because it just feels better, which, you know, rom-coms will feed into. Also, with how unsustainable the streaming model is, which you can hear me rant about it in my streaming video. Studios will pivot their energies more into producing movies rather than like a billion TV shows. And, you know, not just shit on streaming. I think we've gotten some pretty notable rom-coms that like premiered straight to streaming in the past couple of years, specifically To All the Boys I've Loved Before, which I loved. I didn't really love the sequel or the third movie, but the first movie was great. Which, speaking of, it was based on a book. And I think the rom-com renaissance will be frontlined by more book-to-movie adaptations because of the popularity of book talk that can be mobilized as a marketing mechanism, and also because IP in general is less risk-taking than developing a completely new script. We saw this happen with To All the Boys, Crazy Rich Asians, Red, White, and Royal Blue, The Idea of You, and at the time of writing this, It Ends With Us just hit theaters. Though I think It Ends With Us is just a straight romantic drama and not a comedy. Even though Bridgerton is a TV series, I think its success also speaks to how profitable a book adaptation can be. So overall, I'm hopeful because we are embracing rational optimism these days. And yeah. Okay, guys, thanks so much for listening. Thanks for sticking around to the end of this video. If you have a favorite rom-com, please let me know. I'd love to hear it. My hypothesis, so don't prove me wrong, is that When Harry Met Sally will be the most popular comment below. But yeah, I am interested. And if you really want to defend Sleepless in Seattle and You've Got Mail to Me, feel free to do that. I probably won't change my mind. Also, if you liked You've Got Mail, I highly recommend The Shop Around the Corner, which is what You've Got Mail was based on. And it's a 1940 movie. It has Jimmy Stewart, who is, you know, love Jimmy. And it's not a screwball comedy. It's actually very sincere and earnest. It is a romantic comedy. And it's also like kind of a Christmas movie because it, you know, Christmas like features in there. But I really loved it. It's one of my favorite older movies and I highly recommend watching it. Okay, I'll talk to you all next time. See you later. Have a good one. Bye-bye.